What is the best way to EQ your bassline? That's the question that we're going to be answering today. Let's dive into this project here. As you can see, I have a kick and bass laid out among many other things in this project. The kick and bass sounds like this. I went for a nice deep tone in that kick and bass. And the way that I achieved that tone is primarily by removing a lot of this area here. This is roughly 400 to 500 Hertz. That tends to be the area where kind of the muddiness and the nasalness of like a bassline like this is. Like if I boost this, you can definitely hear that there's some nasal frequencies to it. And sometimes when you want to go for a little bit of a darker feeling, it can be beneficial to remove some of these frequencies. So this is just your normal kind of EQ, so it's just going to affect the whole signal. But let's say that you don't want that. Let's say, for example, that you want to EQ the transients differently than the sustain part of the sound. In that case, we can use an equalizer like this one, where the transient and the sustain are separated. The way that an equalizer like this is going to work is that there's going to be a transient detector which you can set up to detect the transients and only send those very initial clicks through this EQ here, while the rest of the signal is being EQ'd by this EQ curve over here. If I turn on this waveform display here, you can actually see what that looks like if I play it. You can see some red spikes which indicate that those parts are going through the transient part here, and then the blue stuff is going through the sustain stuff here. Now before we continue, I do quickly want to say that if you enjoy what I do on this channel, you can support me by liking the video and making sure that you're subscribed. You can also support me financially by checking out my products on Gumroad or checking out my Patreon page, where you'll get early access to videos, priority and feedback stream, and much more benefits. Links for both of them are going to be in the description. Now let's get back into the video. In this case, what I really wanted from this EQ is bringing out a lot of the click. So in the transient EQ, what I did is I boosted the high frequencies of the click. So this is going to be like the main portion of the click, the main portion of the transient. This is going to be roughly around 9 kilohertz. And then here in the sustain part, I did a little bit of cutting around 700 hertz. That's just a frequency that needed it a little bit. The main thing that I really wanted to show you is this trick here. And there's actually a reason why you wouldn't want to do this with a normal EQ, but rather with a transient EQ like this. You see, what I found by using an EQ like this is that you can think of your bassline as two different segments. You have the initial transient, the initial click, and then there's the whole sustain here. And this is of course exactly how this EQ is divided up. We have the sustain part and the transient part. So we can just listen to the transient. This is going to be your click, and then we have our sustain over here. And really what we want is we kind of want to separate them in terms of the processing. We want to think of them as different things. Now, I wouldn't suggest something like layering for this kind of thing, where you actually use two different sounds. You can still think of it as one sound, as it's all coming from one saw wave. But we're just going to EQ the two different signs differently. The reason before why I said that this is important to do it on the transient only is sometimes when you're doing stuff like layering, or in general just making more complex basslines, maybe this bassline isn't the right example for this. But you can have a situation where if you EQ this up too much with the normal EQ, it's kind of going to come out in the later clicks. Even though in the original patch we're filtering out the high frequencies that come from this click here, which in reality looks like this because of the phasing, there can be setups where there's still a little bit of that high frequency stuff remaining, and you really don't want to boost it, because then you're going to lose a little bit of that power of the actual transient, because there's going to be more high frequencies in here as well. So for one, this is a really cool plugin to make sure that that doesn't happen, to make sure that you're actually just EQing the higher frequencies of the transient and not of the sustain part. What is also cool is the fact that you can balance the sustain with the transient. So to just give you an example of what it looked like before, we have the transient kind of like too big for the sustain that we have. So I actually set this to -1. And then the sustain to 1.8, and you get something like this. You get a much more balanced feeling, and you can just dial that in with the two knobs over here. In fact, you could even just do it with one. So that's going to be it for today. I just wanted to show off this one little trick here. If you want to learn much more about Psytrance kick and bass, make sure that you check out the full guide. But that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.